In 1899, a passenger ship named Kerberos was crossing the Atlantic from London to New York. It was filled with migrants from many different countries. In room 1011, a woman suddenly awoke from a nightmare. Upon waking, she discovered two strange scars on her hand. Oddly, she seemed to have lost her memory of that part of the story. At the same time, a newspaper lay on the floor, reporting on a passenger ship named Prometheus that had been missing for 4 months and still had no news. She was stunned by the news. Then, she opened a strangely marked postcard on her desk. The sender was Henry. Inside, he wrote that he had investigated what her father had done. With a flood of memories, she mumbled to herself in the mirror, "I'm not crazy, I'm Maura Franzlin." Her name was Maura, and her purpose was to go to New York to meet her brother, Henry. When she arrived at the ship's luxurious dining room, it was already packed with people from all walks of life. Perhaps due to the different languages spoken, some complained that no matter how loudly they shouted, no one understood them. Others seemed to not know how to use a knife and fork. Maura went straight to an empty seat and sat down. Soon after, a woman in a green dress suddenly sat down next to her. The woman seemed to know Maura. Maura was currently a doctor primarily researching the human brain. The woman asked Maura if there was anything interesting about the brain. Maura said it held the mysteries of the universe. The woman said nothing more but picked up a glass from the table. But a strange scene unfolded. Everyone except Maura simultaneously raised their glasses. When the two resumed their conversation, a man in black suddenly rushed forward and loudly shouted, "Is there a doctor here?" Because a woman below was in desperate need of medical attention. But no one answered him. Because there is still a class division here. The wealthy in first class on the top deck could enjoy fine meals, while the poor could only graze in the large rooms below. Then the man was escorted back by the sailors. Those around him watched silently, unaffected by the sight, continuing their meal. Seeing this, Maura followed alone to see what had happened. When she followed him downstairs, it turned out to be a pregnant woman suffering from severe, unexplained abdominal pain. Maura carefully listened to the baby in a glass and felt that the umbilical cord was probably wrapped around it. She said she would use some technique to change the baby's position. She told the woman to try to bear the pain a little longer. A young girl acted as an interpreter, speaking to the others. Under everyone's astonished gaze, Maura used her technique to change the baby's position. The woman seemed to no longer feel any pain. The man who had previously gone upstairs to call for help thanked her. As Maura was washing her hands and preparing to leave, the little girl suddenly approached her and said she wanted to become a doctor like Maura. Then she asked Maura if she had children. At that moment, strange fragments of memory suddenly flashed through her mind. Maura, terrified, left the place. Meanwhile, on the other side, Captain Larson suddenly received a series of strange distress signals. Based on the coordinates on the signals, the location was about 7 hours away. Could this be the Prometheus that had disappeared 4 months earlier? Because these two ships belonged to the same company, Larson temporarily decided to go there to investigate. However, when the giant ship changed course, everyone on board felt the change in direction. Many people instinctively showed expressions of horror, believing the ship was about to turn back. It seemed that most people were hiding something. Maura also approached Larson and directly asked her about her suspicions. He also explained regarding the Prometheus spacecraft that the signal currently being received is most likely being emitted by it. Maura asked if anyone on the ship was still alive. Larson said the chances were slim, but since they had received a signal, there might still be survivors. After Maura left, Larson took out an envelope with a strange symbol from a drawer. On the back was written a sentence, "What is lost will be found again." Soon after, Larson gathered everyone in first class. Since they were about to arrive, he needed to talk to these people. Some were clearly unwilling, but it was completely useless. There were 1,423 passengers on the Prometheus, so if they had received a signal, at least some had survived. No matter what, they had to go and rescue them. As the ship accelerated, a few hours later, a ship indeed appeared. It was the Prometheus. When a flare shot into the sky, those on board looked at the lifeless ship and seemed to sense something was wrong. Lucian even advised Larson to turn back. They could send the coordinates to the company, so they could send someone. But Larson had his own plans. He wanted to find a few people to go and assess the situation first. Maura eagerly volunteered. As a doctor, he might need their help. To be on the safe side, Larson also found a priest named Ramiro to accompany them. After all, legends about ghost ships still lingered on the high seas. Then, they lowered a small boat and went together to the Prometheus. Strangely, Larson called out several times, but not only did no one answer, and the ship seemed eerily silent. No matter what, only by going aboard would they know if there were any survivors. So everyone climbed the gangway one by one. When they entered, the place they had passed through was already in ruins. There was absolutely no sense of life, and a feeling of fear began to spread through everyone's hearts. Just as they were searching for survivors, Larson suddenly saw a strip of cloth at his feet. He picked it up and examined it carefully, discovering that it had some patterns on it. After seeing him, he seemed to remember something. He hastily hid the piece of cloth in his pocket. Even though Mara asked him what was wrong, he said nothing. Then everyone went to the control room. What surprised them even more was that the signal transmitter had clearly been broken for a long time. So how was this ship transmitting signals? Could it be a ghost? Just as everyone was terrified, a figure suddenly climbed aboard the ship in the distance. Larson led everyone to the dining room. The place was also reeking of foul odors. Someone quietly called out to see if anyone was there. The only response was the profound silence of the air. At the same time, Mora suddenly saw a green beetle at her feet. Its shape was very similar to a fleeting memory she had. Seeing the creature keep going inside, she instinctively followed until she saw a cupboard door blocked by an iron bar. Just as she began to suspect something, several heavy knocks came from inside. This startled everyone. No one knew what was sealed inside. The men hastily stepped back. Only Mora hesitated for a moment before stepping forward to open the cabinet. She nodded to Larson, who was holding a weapon. If there was anything frightening, he could shoot directly. But what surprised everyone was that after opening it, there was only a clean-shaven boy inside. The boy saw Mara, stepped out, and went straight to her side. Then he took out a strange black triangle and gave it to her. This scene was extremely bizarre. Who was this boy? Why was he the only one left on the ship? After bringing the boy back to the ship, Mora tried to communicate with him, but he remained silent, like a mute. As a doctor, she prepared to examine the boy's head, but she accidentally discovered a strange symbol on the back of his neck. At the same time, after returning, Larson suddenly learned something strange. All the compasses on the ship were broken overnight. He immediately took out the compass he had with him to check, but it couldn't tell the direction either. Looking at the steel monster weighing 45,000 tons beside him, all sorts of questions arose in his mind. Mara returned to her room from the dining room. Suddenly, she saw a stranger standing outside her door. The man said he didn't mean to disturb her. He just heard strange noises inside. Then he said his name was Daniel, and he lived in the room next door. Mora looked at the man in front of her and felt a strange sense of familiarity, but she couldn't remember where they had met. Daniel didn't say much and went back to his room. However, after returning, he took out a photograph. It was clearly Mora. After Larson disembarked from the Prometheus, he was somewhat distraught. It turned out that what he had picked up on the ship earlier belonged to his deceased daughter, and now his daughter's voice echoed in the hallway. He didn't understand why this was happening. Just then, a little girl suddenly approached from a distance. He was astonished to find it was his daughter. He hurried after her, but in an instant, her figure vanished. Was he hallucinating? Suddenly, a door beside him automatically opened. Inside, he heard his daughter singing again. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. Unexpectedly, in that moment, he was back in his old home. That year, his wife and children had all died in the fire. He knew all of this was probably a lie, but he couldn't hold back his tears. As he embraced his eldest daughter, preparing to express his longing, the next moment, a fierce fire erupted. A moment later, when he regained consciousness, the place had become a pile of rubble. At the same time, he saw a green beetle suddenly appear there. Following the beetle, he slowly crawled towards the fireplace. When he reappeared, he was back in his cabin on the ship. So were all those events real or fake? Why did this strange secret passage appear in the room? At that moment, a little girl holding a doll suddenly saw a green beetle in the hallway. She slowly sat down, trying to get a closer look, but the beetle ran away. She hurriedly chased after it without even grabbing her toy. Just as she reached the deck, a man suddenly appeared before her. He sat down, holding the beetle in his hand, and apologized. Larson once again gathered everyone together. This time, he decided to tow the Prometheus back to England. Everyone protested loudly, but he completely ignored them. He was determined to investigate what had happened to the Prometheus. As the Kerberos towed the Prometheus back, those on board suddenly discovered a little girl lying unconscious on the deck. Seeing this, Larson turned his head to look towards the Prometheus. Could something in the darkness be warning him? After a thorough examination by the doctor, there were no bruises on the girl's body, no bleeding, and her bones were completely intact. There were also no signs of poisoning. Mora also said that just a few days before, the girl had been perfectly healthy. So why did she suddenly die? Larson instructed his subordinates not to mention this to anyone for the time being. At that moment, the ship's speed suddenly decreased. Everyone went to the deck, only to find themselves surrounded by thick fog. Adding to that, the compass was broken, and they were completely disoriented. These strange occurrences worried Larson. He called Mora into the cabin. There were a few things he wanted to ask her. As soon as the two left, several first officers began to doubt Larson's decision. If it weren't for his stubbornness, things wouldn't have come to this point. At that moment, inside the cabin, Larson gave Mora a silk ribbon he had found on the Prometheus. He explained that it was unique, a piece of his daughter's clothing, because the pattern was embroidered by his wife herself. But strangely, his family had died in a fire at their home 2 years prior, so how could this have appeared on that ship? He also also said he'd recently been seeing things that didn't exist. Everything seemed unbelievable. After hearing this, Mara thought he might be hallucinating due to mental stress. Seeing her disbelief, he lifted the plank under the bed. He insisted he knew the ship like the back of his hand. There couldn't possibly be a tunnel under the bed. He believed all of this was the cruise company's doing. The Prometheus must have discovered something to become like this. He wanted to find the ship's logbook. Perhaps it contained the answers he needed. Mara immediately said she was willing to go with him. Unexpectedly, as they sailed away in their small boat, his subordinates were secretly planning an operation. Franz disobeyed Larsen's orders and went to the slum to find the pregnant woman. Because the deceased girl was her sister, Franz's purpose was clear. In a situation where no one wanted to return, Larsen acted alone because his power was immense and others couldn't disobey him. But now that this had happened, Larsen's responsibility was unavoidable. If he could unite these people to Franz's side, perhaps he could seize Larsen's power. This afternoon's actions had indeed been effective. Resentment had begun to simmer within everyone. At this moment, on the Prometheus, Larsen and Mara found a device next to the boiler. This device measured steam pressure and then sent a signal to the bridge. But according to Larsen, this device never worked on his ship, so it's possible the company intentionally installed it for some other undisclosed purpose. It's unknown if the missing people are connected to it. Mara noticed the boiler nearby and suddenly remembered something. She went over and tried to peek inside. He asked if she thought someone had completely burned the corpses. She said that if they could find teeth or bone fragments, they could identify them. So he quickly examined the area. Unexpectedly, he accidentally found a notebook inside. He pulled it out and saw it was a passenger list for the Prometheus. But when he saw a name on it, he was extremely surprised. Seeing that Mara wasn't paying attention to him, he quickly hid the notebook. Seeing his unusual expression, she asked if he had found anything, but he said nothing and that they should return. At that moment, Franz suddenly saw 3 dead bodies in the hallway. Since Larsen decided to return, many people had died. Knowing the situation was critical, he immediately went to Lucien and told him that these people had died in exactly the same way as the little girl. It was certain that Larsen and the others had brought something back. Franz hoped Lucien would immediately take over the ship and sink the Prometheus, but Lucien hesitated for a moment, then resolutely decided to wait for Larsen's return, so Franz no longer relied on anyone else. He immediately led his men to the poor people on the lower decks and began to incite them to join him in resisting Larsen's actions. These people, who were already reluctant to return, and with so many already dead, all agreed in anger. A riot was about to break out. At this point, Larsen was still unaware of what was happening. He took out the passenger list. The reason he was so surprised earlier was because he had discovered Mara's name on the passenger list of the Prometheus. Was Mara's lost memory related to this? Just as Mara was looking out at the sea, Daniel, who lived in the room next to hers, found her. He told her about Franz's rebellion and advised her to return to her room to avoid being affected. At that very moment, Franz was leading others aggressively toward Larsen's location, but they weren't targeting Mara. She hurried back to her room, worried about the boy in her room if anything happened to Larsen. Soon after, the group stormed the captain's cabin. Because Lucien refused to cooperate, he was also captured. In this situation, Larsen was completely bewildered. These people had completely taken control of the Kerberos. But was that really the truth? At this moment, Daniel took out a strange device. They only saw him quickly do something, and the steam engine on the Prometheus in the distance suddenly started. Who could have imagined that a ship weighing 45,000 tons would mysteriously disappear? But at this moment, those on board were completely unaware. Under Franz's command, he had coordinated with the civilians on the lower decks to directly imprison Larsen. Even so, the number of strange deaths on the ship increased. They all died in the same way, without any external wounds. At the same time, the sailors finally discovered the disappearance of the Prometheus. Faced with such an unbelievable phenomenon, some, relying on their compass, which had now returned to normal operation, analyzed that perhaps what had disappeared was not the Prometheus, but the ship they were on. Because not only had the ship's bow changed direction, but even its current position was the same as it was 3 days before the scheduled departure. In other words, in an instant, they had returned to the course they were preparing to rescue the Prometheus. Was another loop going to happen? Franz immediately decided to change course and head at full speed towards New York. After all, he was the highest-ranking commander now, and the others could only follow his orders. Some terrified people began questioning Lucien about what had happened. Lucien then recounted the story of the boy Larsen had brought back from the Prometheus. He said that since the boy arrived on the ship, death had begun to spread. Some people believed it was the devil. They had to find the boy and deal with him quickly. Then, these people stormed into the first-class cabin and began searching everywhere. The entire ship was in utter chaos. Larsen and Ramiro pried open a ventilation shaft, preparing to escape to seek help. They made their way outside through the ventilation duct. Larsen found a hammer nearby and asked Ramiro to help him break his own arm. Just as Ramiro was about to strike, a man and a woman suddenly approached. Ferron claimed he had no ill intentions and took an iron nail from his pocket. He went over and fixed the nail to the joint of the hand mirror, gesturing for Ramiro to just tap the joint. With 2 clicks, the lock fell to the ground. Larson said he wanted to take a lifeboat to the Prometheus and repair the telegraph there to call for help from the company. The other 2 probably didn't want to share a boat with those people, so they hastily expressed their willingness to support Larson. But they didn't know that the Prometheus had long since disappeared. Perhaps sensing danger approaching, the boy led Mara out, following a green beetle. They followed the path, avoiding the people searching. When the beetle crawled into a room door, the 2 followed it inside. They didn't know that this scene had just been witnessed by a young man. As soon as Mara entered, she saw Larson and the others. She quickly approached Larson and told him that she had been looking for him. But then he asked her how much she actually knew about the Prometheus ship. It seemed he wanted to know about that list. Perhaps sensing his unstable emotions, the boy stood in front of Mara to shield him. At the same time, following the clue provided by the young man, Franz led his men to find them. Larson tried to calm Franz down, but Franz frantically told him to back off. The number of dead was increasing. They had to quickly deal with the boy they considered a demon. Unexpectedly, the boy seemed to proactively step forward for everyone's safety. Jerome wanted to explain, but Franz fired a shot at him. Then all of them were captured. Shortly after they left, Jerome suddenly sat up. It turned out the gunshot had only hit his arm. He calmed down, picked up the hammer from the ground, and went straight to where Larson was being held. Fortunately, the 2 guards were just civilians with no fighting ability. Jerome charged forward and struck them twice, immediately knocking them to the ground. After opening the door, he discovered that quite a few people were still being held captive. They were all first-class passengers who didn't want to share the ship with the others. Jerome said that those people had gone completely insane, so everyone had to stop them from harming the boy. At that moment, a witch outside loudly declared that the boy had stolen their souls. Only by sacrificing him to the sea could they escape disaster. This statement incited the anger of those present. They shouted and threw the boy overboard. Just then, Larson arrived. Mara loudly protested that the deaths of those people had nothing to do with the boy, but the witch insisted that these people absolutely could not be allowed to stop them. A heated argument ensued, and the entire deck was engulfed in chaos. Mara saw the boy in the distance and prepared to run to save him, but she was too late. The witch threw the boy into the sea. If the source of the disaster had been eliminated, those on board would no longer have a reason to continue fighting. But the 2 sides still separated to find places to rest. Mara sat at a table, blaming herself. Daniel, she didn't know when, had come to her side. He reached out trying to comfort her. She also felt very strange about this man. Just then, Larson found Mara. He led her to a place and took out the passenger list of the Prometheus. He questioned why her name was on the list. She couldn't believe her eyes when she saw it. He asked who she really was. At that moment, a loud knock suddenly came from the cabinet behind them. This startled everyone present, but then something strange happened. The boy who had been thrown into the sea clearly crawled out of the cabinet. He went straight to Mara and hugged her tightly. This seemingly warm scene was incredibly bizarre in everyone's eyes. Not long after, Mara suddenly woke up. Could it be that everything that just happened was an illusion? Daniel said she suddenly fainted. The boy had been locked up by others. Mara rushed over, wanting to release him, but Larson stopped her. He said the boy couldn't have survived being thrown into the sea. Otherwise, how could the list be explained? Looking at the continuously knocking on the cupboard door, Mara didn't know how to explain it. She walked closer, but then the next miraculous scene unfolded. She couldn't believe her eyes. Everything seemed to stop, space and time frozen. She slowly approached. The bullet had been fired, and unexpectedly, she easily reached out and caught it. Looking around, she couldn't understand what was happening. At the same time, the knocking resumed. Only then did she remember that the boy was still locked up. She rushed to open the cupboard door, wondering if the boy was responsible for all of this. After the boy went outside, she asked what had happened. He immediately pulled her away. An urgent alarm bell rang throughout the ship. For a moment, most people, like us, turned into zombies with empty eyes. Hearing her daughter's call, the woman seemed to sense something. She glanced at the girl, but the next moment, she climbed over the railing and jumped down. Then more and more people began to jump down, one by one like dumplings falling into a boiling pot. The scene was incredibly bizarre and shocking. At this moment, the boy led Mara to her room and moved the bed. Then he opened the secret compartment under the bed. He quietly went down and waited for her to come closer to look. She saw that he had somehow acquired a green beetle in his hand. The small beetle paused for a moment, then quickly crawled in one direction, seemingly opening a passageway in an instant. The boy hurriedly followed. Mara was full of suspicion, but she quickly crawled down. Unexpectedly, there was another strange tunnel in the secret chamber. Without Without hesitation, she tried her best to get out. After getting out, she discovered that they were in a different dimension. It seemed the green beetle could lead them through space. At this point, the boy had disappeared. But in the distance, there was a large house, so Mora decided to go and investigate. Meanwhile, the mysterious man Daniel on the ship anxiously ran into Mora's room. When he saw the secret chamber open, he couldn't help but curse angrily before quickly crawling inside. But the tunnel had closed again, so he quickly took out the device he was carrying. After a while of manipulating it, the tunnel finally opened again. He hurriedly crawled out. When he got outside, he saw the boy not far away. The boy spoke for the first time. It turned out that both of them knew that Mora had indeed lost some of her memories. Daniel wanted to prevent the person lurking behind the scenes from starting a new loop. Sem realized that the world the ship was in wasn't real. When Mora entered the house, she only saw a strange chair in the flood-proof room. This was also a scene she often dreamed of, but she couldn't remember anything. Just then, a man's voice came from behind her. She turned around and realized it was her father. He questioned her about where she had hidden the things. She didn't understand what her father was talking about. When she refused to cooperate, two people suddenly rushed out, pushed Mora down onto the chair, and injected her with a strange drug. When Mora woke up, she was unexpectedly back on the ship. Seeing the marks on her wrists, she confirmed that the previous scene was real, so she rushed to find Larson. But Larson had strong suspicions about her. Firstly, about the list, and secondly, about how she had disappeared with the boy. She said she had confirmed some things, but the answer would probably be insane. Larson found a secret room for Mora to explain everything in detail. Mora said Franklin was her mother's surname. Her real name should be Mora Singleton. Singleton was her father and the owner behind the acquisition of the shipping company. Mora suspected her father was using the shipping company to conduct brain experiments on passengers. Her brother seemed to have discovered this secret, so he arranged to meet her in New York. By the time she arrived, she should have been there 4 months ago. Perhaps she really was a passenger on the Prometheus, but strangely, she had lost this memory. As she spoke, she noticed a green beetle on the table. She quickly went to grab a cup to cover it and then found a box to put it in. Although she didn't understand the principle behind it, she had seen how the boy used it. When she placed the green beetle into the secret chamber, she only saw the small beetle slowly crawl through the wall. Then a passage quickly opened. Without hesitation, she quickly crawled through. Soon after, Larson followed closely behind and crawled in, but this place seemed to be a different space than before. However, panicked, they ran forward. Mora asked him if he knew where they were. Larson, with a sorrowful expression, said this was his home. That year, a fire had killed his wife and children. He had never been able to get over it, but how could they have been on the ship just moments ago and now suddenly be here? At this time, people were still jumping off the ship one after another. Daniel used his equipment to connect with the ship. After a while of manipulation, he finally stopped the strange sound. A woman preparing to jump on the deck suddenly woke up. She seemed unaware of why she was there. Mora and Larson returned to the ship. When everyone gathered, they discovered that out of over 1,000 passengers, they were the only ones left. At the same time, Larson handed Larson the information from the company, which only contained the words shipwreck. Could it be that they were being told to sink the Prometheus to end it all? Just as everyone was beginning to doubt, Daniel suddenly stepped forward and told them that the shipwreck wasn't limited to the Prometheus. If they all died, a new cycle would begin. To convince them, he led them into the ship's hold. They saw strange black crystals appearing in the corridor, slowly spreading. Daniel warned everyone not to touch them and that they had to immediately get the ship going, otherwise they would all die. So, regardless of whether they were rich or poor, they could only cooperate in the boiler room to start the ship. Mora led Larson through the secret tunnel to another space. Although Mora's father wasn't there, after Larson opened the window, he discovered a strange sight. The outer covering seemed to be the ship's hull. What was going on? Mora also went to the side and tried to pry open the panel, but when she opened it, she saw that the entire interior was just the ship's outer iron shell. Could it be that they had never left the ship before? Mora was fascinated by brain research. In her understanding, reality and memory were determined by the brain. Without it, experiencing these things would all be illusory. Suddenly, one day, her son unfortunately fell ill with a terminal disease and was about to die. So Mora and her husband, Daniel, invented a brain system that simulated real life. She wanted to make her son immortal in another way and frequently entered the system to be with him. But unexpectedly, for some unknown reason, the system suddenly malfunctioned. It frequently crashed and restarted after only a short while. To figure out what was happening, she once again entered the system to investigate the cause. But this time, she never returned because, for some unknown reason, the system had been rewritten and upgraded. It was no longer under her control. Even her previous memories were erased. The system assigned her a completely new image of a single woman. Fortunately, as a precaution, Mora had left herself a clue and a key to awaken at any time. But this very thing caught the attention of the program within the system. It was the code about her father that Mora had uploaded. It turned out that after a long period of upgrades and updates, the old man had developed self-awareness. He knew he was trapped in Mara's virtual system, so he wanted to seize the clue and key to awaken and return to reality, and moreover, he had the ability to rewrite part of the code. But even though the system changed, Mara's son wasn't bound. It was somewhat like a glitch in the game. This is also why the boy could ignore some of the system's rules. However, Mara's memories were rewritten by the system, so he couldn't recognize his mother. With the start of the new virtual reality game, the ship officially departed from London to New York. Mara's father needed to find clues and keys in this process. Otherwise, once Mora arrived at Disco, she might directly wake up in reality. But what if he never found what he wanted? The system also had a setting where, once most passengers died, the program would automatically shut down and restart, meaning a new loop was about to begin. He exploited this method, repeatedly tormenting Mara. Other passengers also suffered greatly as a result, not knowing how many loops they had experienced. Perhaps Mora had been trapped for too long, which is why Daniel discovered the problem, so he allowed his consciousness code to enter the system as well. He wanted to rescue his wife from this place. After all, this system was originally developed by the two of them together. Although the system has been upgraded countless generations, its original schmuster remains unchanged. So he rewrote the code, using the Prometheus ship to regain access. Since entering, Mora has acquired a new set of memories, so she doesn't recognize Daniel as her husband. Daniel's abilities are limited, and the old man lurking behind the scenes continues to deceive, so he can only try everything to help Mora regain her memories. But after experiencing a series of unbelievable events, Mora still cannot recover her previous memories. However, she is beginning to believe that this world isn't real. Then Daniel suggests that to leave she needs a key and a clue. She accidentally found a key in her necklace. This was indeed the key to leaving the virtual world. The so-called clue was the pyramid in the boy's hand. The boy probably didn't know where the key was either. He had given the pyramid the clue to his mother countless times, but Mara completely didn't understand what this meant. The scene of Mara taking out the key was witnessed by the old man who was always watching her, so he first had his NPC henchman, Lucian, capture the boy. After obtaining the pyramid clue, he used the boy to blackmail Mora into handing over the key. At the same time, he prepared to put the ship into a new loop. This action also cornered Daniel. Daniel used a virus to directly infiltrate the server with the intention of forcibly waking Mora, but his actions also caused suffering to the other passengers because viruses are uncontrollable. As the scenes constantly changed, these people began to experience all sorts of terrifying hallucinations. Seeing Daniel's agitated state and fearing something might happen, he forced Franz to bring Mora along. Naturally, this was also to obtain the key, as per his own wishes. At this point, Mora still believed her father had orchestrated everything. She didn't understand why he would do this. He reprimanded her for forcing this situation onto others and trapping everyone in an endless loop. Mora thought her father was behind it, while he believed she was the mastermind, but he had obtained the key. Mora prepared to lead the others out of here completely, but before that, he would trap her back in the loop so she could experience the feeling of being permanently trapped in the virtual system. Unexpectedly, when Mora opened her eyes, she wasn't back on the ship because, under Daniel's manipulation, the simulated scene of the ship had collapsed. He held the pyramid and inserted the key, preparing for it to fall completely. However, after spinning it around, he found nothing had changed. Franz didn't understand what was happening. The old man said someone had rewritten the code. At this moment, Mora walked towards the cross in the distance, and then to the room below. There, a family photo of the three of them was displayed. Soon after, Daniel arrived and told Mora that he had rewritten the clue and the key. This was the initial simulated scene when they built the system. He took out the new pyramid and said the new key was their wedding ring. Daniel warned Mora to definitely wake up because the entire system had long been controlled by Henry. At this point, the mystery was completely revealed. The system they created was originally to commemorate their son. Unexpectedly, when Mora entered the system, Henry took control of everything. He not only rewrote and upgraded the system, but also applied it to space travel so that passengers in long hibernation could still experience different journeys in the virtual system. In the game Henry set up, passengers would forget their real-world memories. Only such an experience would be truly amazing. Therefore, Mara's memories were also rewritten. Daniel said this was more complicated than they thought. No matter what, she had to wake up. So Mara had to wake up in reality. But when she woke up, she discovered she was in space. She was surrounded by other hibernating passengers like herself. These people were also experiencing the virtual game. It was only due to her father's interference that they were trapped in virtual reality. Finally, Mara received a message from her brother with information about Prometheus, welcoming her back to reality. reality. But whether this was reality or not was uncertain. In any case, she hadn't recovered her memories. Part 1 of the film ends here. Goodbye, and see you in the next